Starting. Okay, so we have some pretty strong players in here. GameSlayer definitely one of tournament favorites. Curious to see how he fares, but also much more curious to see how other players fare. So the map is a glass map, and doesn't look particularly bad. There's some very funky iron on the map though, so this scavenger is going to be the prize spot. Definitely. This, however, could be an interesting science spot, I think. The prices are pretty depressing though, only cams are especially expensive, and indeed Pops is going to found as the obvious scavenger in the crater. And he's going to claim water. That's interesting because this is one of the best water tiles on this side of the map, actually. But that's also a bit questionable, keeping in mind just how cheap water is. In the meantime, Space Oddity is doing a very simple robot with just a medium mine. That's a little bit interesting. Polina is being a scavenger with low carbon, going to rely on the carbon that is going to be produced by Pops, and GameSlayer is being just your very basic expansive player in a very simple spot, probably going to claim 2 low tiles and run on 3 steel mills, which is going to be actually incredibly painful because there's only one other steel maker in the game. Thankfully, Space Oddity is going to make steel. At this point, everyone is HQ level 2. Pops was first to upgrade. He upgraded very quickly. However, he claimed a geothermal, which, considering how much he's making, is plausible. But at the same time, you kind of want to upgrade before you move into that, and you definitely want to try to move into your money-making production like this farm before you build the geo. In fact, he cancelled the geo. Space Oddity is going to move into more steel. A little bit questionable choice here. Trying to run 3 steel mills with just 1 medium iron tile, that is going to be very difficult, especially considering the fact that GameSlayer is only running 2 metal mines. He is going to try to create a surplus, I mean a stockpile of iron. And Polina is moving into 3 carbon quarries. That is going to be potentially necessary, but at the same time a very difficult decision to make, in my opinion, because you are spending that extra claim that you could be using on, say, extra water or potentially even power, because carbon is staying cheap. Now, Pops is the first to get a geothermal plant, and in fact any source of power on the map. We talked about this being an early geo, but definitely incredibly early for Space Oddity to move into the geo on HQ level 2. That is often not a good choice because that's a lot of steel that you're not spending towards the upgrade. And Polina and GameSlayer first, very close to one another to expand. It's definitely not a horrible spot for an expansive player, but it's definitely also a difficult spot to have to run just 3 steel mills, 2 scavengers in the game. Pops is not that far behind. Everyone seems to be making food. GameSlayer is making chemicals, though, which is an interesting choice considering just how much carbon there was in the game. But at the same time, he's making fuel, which I believe started low. Possibly, I'm not sure, but he is basically preparing a market for someone else. And it seems that Polina is going to be the someone else. Glass coming out for Pops. That's a bit of a difficult thing. Well, oh, he is claiming silicon, so that makes definitely a lot more sense. And I quite like that decision, actually. He's the first to hit the glass market, and glass market is going to be huge in this game. Space Oddity is struggling to upgrade to level 3 because of that geo, which is barely keeping her. Well, actually, it's not so bad, but it's still just repaying debt, effectively. and not contributing towards the cash situation in hand, which is definitely a bit of a problem. Now, Polina, who I have never seen play a multiplayer game before, by the way, but I've definitely seen a lot of daily challenge games. And one of the things that definitely shows is that they are making a lot of cash, which is something you do in daily challenge. That's basically the most important thing to do, to make a lot of cash, and we see reactors that aren't unchallenged as of yet. And you can see that GameSlayer is barely making a profit of these cams. In fact, I wonder why he even is in cams still. He's definitely creating a big basically creating an advantage for Polina to use. That was an interesting overload, in my opinion, because it didn't really hurt so much, which makes me wonder why it even came down. I'm curious if he was planning, if he was hoping to pop a goon, but in that case you should probably hit the tile that is directly adjacent to the HQ. And GameSlayer indeed turns his refineries off, because unlike network viruses, circuit overloads don't keep these buildings running. Maybe that was the plan. Maybe Pop simply mistook one BM for another one. Space Oddity unfortunately still 1 HQ behind, moving into a lot of silicon and water, which is perhaps not as unreasonable as it might seem, because the price of water is quite high, and it's being made high by Polina to a large extent, although she did move into another water pump. And glass is the one market that is going to jump ahead and keep getting more expensive for a while. Even though GameSlayer is moving into glass a little bit, he's also relying on a single low silicon quarry. I wonder if he's planning to see Space Oddity flood the market with the silicon, as she is going to need to make just so much more money to keep upgrading. And a second geothermal plant with power at $60, I don't think this is a well-timed decision. Not necessarily a bad decision in itself, but perhaps not the best time to do that, since once again steel is very expensive, and a lot of it's just going towards power, which had been kept fairly low. Polina is moving into a wet lab, which is something I like to see. I like seeing advanced buildings. I have a thing for advanced buildings, you know, and it's the first one we see this game. Patents. I can see... actually, I'm not sure what kind of patents you might want to have. I want to say that well, Pops made this beautiful decision to move into Pleasure Dome, which is exceptionally good this game, or should be. And I would say that virtual reality is a good decision. Teleportation is a decent decision. I'm not a huge fan of teleportation at all points in the game, which is something players do like to do. However, with 3 low carbon quarries, that is a very reasonable choice, because you will want to repurpose those. Even though I don't think that anyone would really attack them so much, but you never know. That's certainly being a problem for Polina, even though she does have 2 geothermal plants. By the way, I apologize if I call someone a she when it's a he, or a he when it's a she, because I'm a bit confused, frankly, with the names. GameSlayer is moving into a patent lab and getting thinking machines. Now, that's, I think, a better choice than teleportation, at least for GameSlayer, definitely, because he's shipping very few things. But I'd like to point out, though, that GameSlayer has no water, which is an impressive thing to pull off. Really. Pops at the same time is HQ level 5. He does not have a lot of buildings making him money, but he does have some, and I'm curious as to why he rotated out of glass. That was a strange thing to rotate out of. But so he did. Here we can see that Legitome is making almost 300, except he did get virtual reality. I think I have been... I'm clicking things, but I didn't mean to click. Sorry. I believe... sorry, I missed a couple auctions here because I was busy talking about things I should not have been talking. Instead, I should have been talking about auctions, but I did miss them, and virtual reality may have been one of them. In fact, using the innovative chat scrolling function, I will notice that indeed there was an auction for the patent that Pops won. So power is definitely a big problem for Polina. Somehow Pops is not very much in having problems with power. I guess that early geothermal really did pay off. GameSlayer is not having a lot of issues with power either, at least compared to what GameSlayer usually experiences. But Polina is definitely in a bit of a troubling situation. Space Oddity definitely has no problems with power, except I am not a fan of what their situation is. Power surge is at 3k. Is this my chat? Yes, this is my chat. There is no power surge. There are EMPs, however. I have to say that goons are at 50,000. Claims are 20,000. Everything else had been barely used. Apparently someone had been using spies, though, which is an interesting thing. And Polina upgrades to HQ level 5. I have to say not a lot of stock purchases either. No one really is paranoid in this game and thinks he should defend himself. Pops is moving into a hacker array, which is an interesting choice. Is it? Well, there are no holograms, so it's a hacker array, and he's going to hack electronics. Unfortunately, Space Oddity is making electronics, as well as GameSlayer, so I really don't like this choice. In fact, I would like to point out that none of them has used a spy on that building. And now even Polina is moving into electronics. Polina should really do something about the debt situation, because D-debt is very, very worrisome. So Popsier Socks has some optimizations that are not running currently. He does have a patent lab somehow. Oh, he had mutinied a patent lab to get carbon scrubbing, probably with a plan to deny that patent to someone else, which is a bit of a questionable idea since I don't think it's a huge problem this game. Not with all the scavengers overproducing carbon, although carbon is quite expensive at this point. Off-worlds, by the way, are extremely good to send food to. This reactor is difficult to explain, though. I can only assume that he somehow missed it and failed to delete it. That sometimes does happen. Polina is optimizing, once again, a little bit of everything, which is good. Not sure about the fuel optimization, but I guess fuel was quite expensive for a while. And they had that running for a while as well. Cam production, all good. Overall, I would say that the on-world prices are not going to be exceptionally high, but they're going to be high enough to make these optimizations very much worthwhile. Space Oddity is HQ level 5. Seeing 2 diamonds is a bit of a problem for me. I really wish to see a bit more of money-making production like glass. In fact, the fact that no one is making glass, well, GameSlayer was, I guess, and Pops was, and Polina is moving into an off-world market. I would say that glass is definitely underproduced. Unfortunately, the hacker array is still making electronics shortages, which are simply not that profitable for Pops, especially considering he was frozen out briefly. And look at how Space Oddity really is hitting into those electronics, making carbon extremely expensive. I guess that's part of the reason why carbon is so expensive, not just scavengers upgrading. Space Oddity really does need something that should help her to advance. And seeing a distinct lack of advanced buildings other than a pleasure dome, which frankly is a good pleasure dome, is a little bit concerning. So Belina has an offer market. The problem with that is that she is the target now, and Popsia Socks, sitting on a lot of cash, is definitely buying into her. The question is, her advanced production, her off-world market, is it going to be able to be enough to carry her? The problem with all of this is the D-debt, really, because you ideally want to repay that debt, which other players, by the way, don't have. But it's really difficult. I'm a little bit surprised to see no more patent labs. Everyone moved out of them, even though there are only 5 patents that are in game currently. Thinking Machines and Carbon Scrubbing for Gameslayer, who by the way has lost his off-world that he moved into.
You can't let them get this. Now before it's too late.
And Nanotech and Teleportation for Polina, as well as VR for Pops. But I would really want to see financial instruments in this game, because there's quite a bit of debt in here. And I'm a little bit surprised that that patent didn't happen. Cold Fusion is simply not a very important patent to have, with everyone having 1 or 2 geos and crushing power violently. But for 10k debt when you only have 30k, it's really not a terrible thing to grab. Now, protecting an off-world with so much debt should be difficult. I will note that Molina is not repaying debt. Instead, they are balancing on between the C and D levels just to keep being able to goon the market. The problem with attacking Gameslayer's off-world, though, is exactly the reason that he has thinking machines, and it is incredibly difficult to attack him. I would say that he's probably very well set if the game is going to drag on a little bit longer, if Pops and Polina kill each other especially. But I don't think he's actually in the lead. In spite of the D-debt, I really like the amount of money Polina has. Gameslayer, however, is moving to his second off-world, and now that could just be the advantage he's seeking. I would also like to point out that he only has 1 low silicon quarry, which is not enough silicon. And an off-world market comes for Pops, who loses it to Gameslayer. Gameslayer obviously knows that Polina's off-world is protected. The problem that I have with that a bit is that I guess Polina really isn't that far in the lead. But Gameslayer is definitely trying to get that advantage that he so needs to win the game, and he's fairly well set up. Space Oddity is not making a lot of money, unfortunately. I see an offer coming for them, which is a great thing to see. I would like to point out that food still hasn't quite gotten out of hand, in spite of being so good off-world. Also, cams are fairly good off-world. I wonder if we're going to see fuel or cams being sent. Carbon, unfortunately, is actually losing so much money for Space Oddity, as the electronics factories are producing at a very unfavorable rate. And that's part of the problem why I think the Scavengers are having a big advantage here over Gameslayer, in spite of the fact that he really is getting a lot of work done. What I don't like to see out of Gameslayer is the fact that he does not have optimization centers. So in fact, in a longer game, he will not have as much of an advantage. The problem with that is that for some reason, the Scavengers are not moving into second off-worlds. Only now do I see an off-world for Polina. And Pops is running on 0 offworlds as his is taken by Gameslayer currently. It's a bit of a concern, in my opinion. Palina, however, is very well set to buy Pops out. Just a lot of money off of that good production. Never bothering with glass is a very interesting decision on their part, because sure, it's a great market, but also silicon became out of hand, and shipping silicon is difficult, and those are claims that you have to devote to something that everyone will be making. So instead of doing that, just concentrating on life support seemed to work out more or less. Well, Space Oddity is not in a good spot, however, not being able to secure their stock, and Gameslayer is looking at buying them out, which will be incredibly profitable with a running off-world market and this little scientist-shaped production block, which I'm sure the AI will build solar panels on. And I would like to point out that Palina is still on that borderline between C and D-Dat and somehow riding it all the time. Now Pops is looking to be in a very bad spot, because he can be bought out. Cancelling launches, I think, would do the trick, or maybe cancelling upgrades. Well, there's not a lot of them running, in fact there are none at this point. Either way, with the off-worlds frozen, that's definitely going to be a bit more of a problem for Palina. But Pops is effectively out of the game. I don't believe he has anything that he can do to stay in game.
The engineers have advanced our production.
And he has two off-worlds. He has an off-world by the Colony, which is a bit surprising. This looks to be a good game to have an off-world by the Colony. It would make sense for Gameslayer not to build one, because he has thinking machines, but other than that, I'm a little bit surprised that people are moving into those. However, here comes the purchase, and it's a 1v1 between Palina and Gameslayer. And it should be quite a close race. It's definitely a question of which sub is more profitable, and I definitely think that Pops is much more profitable. With his production, his two offers, one of them by the Colony, and his Pleasure Dome, which is a better Pleasure Dome because it has VR. Whereas Gameslayer has the advantage of not being in sea levels of debt, and the advantage of having thinking machines, as well as pretty aggressive optimization, late game optimization, which I am not a huge fan of, but can certainly be incredibly strong. Optimization is always strong, no matter at what point you start it. Although you will see that Palina certainly has a lot more optimizations done. However, buying those super expensive mutinies is definitely going to probably seal the deal for Palina, unfortunately, because that's a lot of money. The sands are very expensive, almost 60k. Which I believe is 1,000 per second per off-world. I can do math. And really, I don't know what else to say, because somehow, through some wizardry, actually no, that's not true. The sub is definitely better for Palina, but it doesn't seem to quite be enough with all these off-worlds, because Gameslayer is running on 4 off-worlds currently, which is a lot of off-worlds to be running on.
Launch affirmative. Payout.
Definitely curious to see what is going to happen next, because I mean, this game is pretty much done. Gameslayer should be able to buy Palina, but we did see a lot of strong plays out of Palina and Pops, and frankly, I wouldn't say that Space Oddity did a bad job. Still not a fan of those early geothermals. I think otherwise it would have been great. And hey, look, solar panels and aluminium. 5 aluminium ones. Good job, Sub AI. But this was a close race, and I wonder if GameSlayer expected it to be a close race, because these are not the players he has played a lot with, I assume, and not the players he might have expected a lot of good plays from. So I think if he ever looked at Daily Challenge, he should keep in his. And the game is over indeed. 2 off-worlds, a lot of production, thinking machines. I would say the thinking machines was the decisive factor in this game, and DDET definitely made it a lot harder for Polina. But just the fact that attacking GameSlayer was so incredibly hard proved to be quite a problem. But good game.